My name is Sandy Longhorn. I'm an English instructor here at Pulaski Technical College, and I direct the Big Rock Reading Series. For those of you who don't know, we sponsor 3 readings per academic semester. We're off in the summer, and we invite authors both from Arkansas and from around the country when we can get them here, as today. So very excited about our readers. We also will have some door prizes at the end of the event, so hold on to that. Wait for that at the end. And if you're here for a class, we will be done in time for you to go on to your 12 o'clock class if you have one. Before we get started, I'd like to ask everybody to put their, put their cell phones on mute or silent or whatnot. My famous story is that once I was doing a reading and my mother called me during the reading and I had not silenced my phone. Before we begin, I'd first like to thank the Arkansas Literary Festival for partnering with us again this year and being a co-host to our event. The Arkansas Literary Festival is going on today, tomorrow, and Sunday in the River Market for most of the events. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I hope you will. And they will be selling Charlotte and Adam's books outside after the event. And then after you purchase a copy, you could bring it back in and have it signed. I'd also like to thank our PTC administration, our support staff, the English department faculty, and our donors who are found listed on the back of your program. This series is only possible through the generous support of the people and organizations listed there. And in your program, you're going to find 2 extra things. One of them is green, because everybody knows that green is money. And so that is our donor form. If you like what you hear here today, and you'd like to help us bring more authors in the future, you can fill out that form. And in an exciting development, we now have an ability to take credit cards online. That's explained in your program. There's also a pink survey, and if you would take a moment to fill that out at the end of our reading today, that data helps us apply for grants to bring more writers here in the future as well. So now that we have all the business taken care of, let me talk about Charlotte Pence, our first reader. Charlotte's poetry has been described as electric, works of significant mythic force, and dangerous. Her full-length poetry collection, Spike, will be released by Black Lawrence Press later this year. She's the author of 2 award-winning poetry chapbooks, The Branches, The Axe, The Missing, and Weaves a Clear Night. And I think today what we have is The Branches, The Axe, The Missing outside. Pence also edited The Poetics of American Song Lyrics that explores the similarities and differences between poetry and songs. I know that's often a topic of interest for my students. Having recently earned her PhD in creative writing from the University of Tennessee, she is now a professor of English and creative writing at Eastern Illinois University. Please help me welcome Charlotte.
Hi everyone. How's my voice sound there in the back? Good? Good? Great. Well, we are delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having us with Sandy Longhorn and Arkansas Literary Festival. I'm from the South. I'm from Tennessee, and just this last year we moved to Illinois. And while we're very happy in Illinois, and a poet is always happy to have a job that involves poetry, it has just been so nice to have spent the night here in Little Rock last night. It's green. People talk to you and give you too much information. I love too much information from strangers. We shared our dinner table with this lovely group last night, and the guy told us how his baby mom was having a kid, and he was mad at her, so he told the doctors that they were Muslim and not to give her an epidural. She did not agree to that, and I was like, wow, he is just asking for trouble. But I loved it. I just loved it. So thank you for having me. All right, let's get started here. I'm going to begin with a poem called Argument that is the first poem of my collection that will be coming out. And it discusses my relationship with my father, who's paranoid schizophrenic, and he's been chronically homeless since I was 18. And clearly, you know, there's a lot of emotions involved in that. There's heartbreak and there's sadness for the person, but there's also something else between my father and me as the daughter who has to decide how I'm going to help him or not help him. So this is the poem that begins that collection. The wind bending a thin-trunked pine, butterscotch scented, sounds like the opening of a door. And so, I think of my father, how through him, his Oreo fat, his hardening cock, his damp, long curled lashes, I stutter-stepped into myself, a woman in wonder. Why do you say that stuff? My father interrupts as I write. What do you mean? The word cock? No, that right there, he says, and lifts one hand, glass of OJ, lifts the other, Little Debbie oatmeal, cream pie. So he stands like an odd Lady of the Scales statue, chewing a wad of snack cake. I don't understand. Are you talking about how I talk about our family, about us, about you and me? He said, no, all of it, he says, and circles his drink in the air like a drunk. You think we're everything. And what's out there, he says, pointing toward the window, you don't get. I answer, yesterday I saw something I've never seen before. A canary yellow web that only one spider in the world can weave. What do you think about that? He shrugs. That's yesterday. So that opens the collection, and it's very much talking about my sensibilities as a poet, sensibilities that he finds just to be unnecessary, right? I'm spending my time looking at these beautiful spider webs in Costa Rica. And it's true, there is one spider that weaves golden thread. And when I saw this web, I'm like, wow. But my father would look at all of these preoccupations of mine as so superficial or luxurious, and I find them that they give me the desire to keep living the life that I do. So I let him speak a lot in this collection because he deserves that space. And this next poem is called My Father Speaks of Thieves. Begins with the epigraph by Matthew, verse 21:13. My house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. Let's imagine a world of lack of luck, lack of money, the way the road narrows closer to home. And let's imagine a girl of extras, freckles, glares, stories, and friends, a girl who sells rotten tomatoes at the market for more money than the good ones. Let's imagine the world as it is. Of course people were selling pigeons in the temple, that den of thieves, house of den. Need is not thievery. Let's imagine a man asking his 8-year-old for a loan. She draws up a contract on her toy box, her stuffed animals lined up like prisoners before a firing squad, everyone watching as she says, with interest. So, as you see here, you have this almost contest for survival between these two figures, right? I'll read one more poem. Excuse me here. That way. I will read one more poem that talks about this subject, and this one is called, it's a rewriting of the myth of Cinderella. And in my research about paranoid schizophrenia, I realized there's something called memory corruption. You know, we talk about this a lot. Like, I don't know if you've ever tried to write something or tell a story about your family, and you have like a sibling who'll be like, no, that's not what happened. It's this. You know, you can even have like one sibling have a completely different relationship with the same parent, right? And in creative writing, we often look at memory corruption as a negative. Like, what's the reality thing? What really happened? You know, we're fixated on that. And if a fiction writer or a nonfiction writer steps out of line, like, oh, but in terms of a biological point of view, I was reading how memory corruption is very helpful to humans as a species. It helps us practice what we should do the next time something happens. So it doesn't matter what actually happened. We're telling ourselves stories, so we tell ourselves how to behave. And I thought that was really interesting. And people with paranoid schizophrenia have a much higher level of memory corruption. So this one is called memory corruption. Cinderella always knew she'd lose a shoe. And just so you know, as I'm reading, you think, what? That contradicts what she just said? Yes, that's exactly right. We're playing with contradictions here. And we're focusing on the sisters in the house. The kitchen's chimney was overtaken by knitted ant trails. The family could only boil, not smoke their meat. And one daughter later swore ants never existed, only mortar crumbs. This daughter built terrariums inside the house's steps with hinges and sally ports. She kept a duster to wipe each cactus. One sister said, "You'll marry a fine gentleman," and she nodded but knew the divorce. She also knew he was a fine gentleman, just dull. He didn't have enough sweat between his legs, and it was then that her sister challenged her down the banister. The daughter took the banister down for speed, but she closed her eyes so she couldn't see the fall, and of course she opened her eyes so she saw the fall. The blurring living room unsettled her balance. Ants in the chimney twitched their antennae into touchdown signs. There were points awarded, maybe 3 stitches and a cast. Ink was already wet on the marriage license, so she chose the orange leg cast. But wait, had she not lost her shoe yet? Like every woman who divorces, clarity came afterward. She wanted to pretend the marriage never happened, but there were certain proofs. She smelled of cigarette smoke. She danced all the 80s nights in town. And what was missing were the terrariums of cacti. And the house, being a one-story rancher, had neither a banister nor stairs. That's a hard poem to read. I built it like steps on the page. And each line is done in a way so you could read it back like one way up or down. And it kind of makes sense. Not always, but enough for a poet. Let me read this one poem that I wrote when I was feeling homesick. I like to do these writing residencies. They're wonderful. You go away by yourself, and people feed you and take care of you. You stay in this little room. And I went to this one place in Costa Rica. It was an old defunct fruit farm. It just, there was still fruit, but all of it was kind of rotten and whatnot. But it was in this little town. There's nothing in this town except 10 little apartments for artists and writers to come to. And the owner of it told the people in town that it was really a snake farm to keep everyone away. So, I don't know what the local townspeople thought. Just a bunch of crazy Americans kept wanting to come to the snake farm, and they all were like, no, no. Do they not have snakes in the U.S.? Like, why do you want to do that? But I love being there. And when I was there, I read this article online about something happened in my hometown of Knoxville, which is right next to the Smoky Mountains. This one's called Space Bears and Doxology. Excuse me one second. First reports described a runaway bear wearing a space helmet. I'm not surprised. It is Tennessee, and black bears gone alien are a possibility. Here, life, not as it seems, is the hope. So, after a month, wildlife rescuers tracked the scat to find a juvenile male with his head stuck in a plastic Walmart candy jar. Juju fruits. Honey of all hives. The vet judged the bear one winter from death, having lost half its body weight. He had learned to drink by lying down in the shallow streams where the water would seep in slow enough to keep him from drowning. The story reminds me how as a child I sewed pink curtains onto roach motels, figuring they'd like it better that way, both coming and going, the curtains a lure and an escort. I know the bear doesn't debate about any of this, but if there were such a thing as heaven, wouldn't it be like the moment that jar was removed, that rush of autumn air on his face? No barrier between paw and tongue, touch and taste. The world as it is now and ever shall be, suddenly right before him, roughing cheeks with sun on autumn mornings, and if he's lucky, pricking his eyes with the sting of sleet come winter. And this is I like to bring in research into my poems. I got, as my husband, he's a picture writer, he was talking to me last night, he's like, you always got the emotional part in the poems. And so me bringing in research, that just brings in something else, kind of like counter one element of the poems. I look at it very much as tension. I think that a poem works best when you have disunifying forces at work, not when everything's all nice and neat, right? And I was looking online about, it was really bad marketing. I was reading this thing about the Empire State Building and how it is one of the buildings where you've had the most suicide jumpers, right? And they were starting this contest to get married there, and it was something like, jump into marriage. And you're just like, no, don't do that. Don't you know? Just don't do something like that. But I was interested in this these ideas of dual attractions with the Empire State Building, how it scares the hell out of us, but we still want to go up there, right? So this poem is written about one of the most famous jumpers from the top of this building. It's called Attractions. Out of 30-some jumpers off the Empire State, one is known as the most beautiful suicide. Evelyn McHale. There are photos, blogs, paintings. We can appreciate the desire to imagine death as she portrays it. A swirling white scarf with the ferocity of teeth, the sudden bang, position of deep sleep. She was one of the few ever to land whole. After ending an engagement, she decided to leap big toward nothing, avoiding all terraces and signage. Witnesses commented on how far out she jumped, seemed impressed by that American go-get-itness. What's curious, though, isn't the limousine hood that crumpled around her like a black satin pillow, nor her crossed ankles, her gloved fingers touching her pearl necklace. But on that day, she, like the rest of us, dressed for the cold, buttoned her coat, knotted her scarf, and covered her head. I'm going to practice, I'm going to do a 2-minute poem warning, I guess, here. I'm going to read you this one poem. This is a new one, so I'm still kind of tinkering. It's called Ozymandias and Ye. It's taken off from Shelley's poem, Ozymandias, you know, where you have this person who goes upon, he finds this monument now decayed. He's like, look on my works, ye mighty, in despair, right? Talking about, I guess, the egoism, or egotism, is that the word? Egotism of man, right? So I wrote a poem in response to that. It's called Ozymandias and Ye. Everyone agrees that Ozymandias can go screw himself. Look on my works, he says, and we do, satisfied with shell slivers and wind. How easy it is to dislike him. Even though Ozzy's a stand-in for many of us, minus the kingdom and rubies and whatnot. I too puff and bellow about my busy life. I too wobble underneath the strain of computer cranings and leave trunkless legs, and sometimes believe otherwise. Yet if I died from a paper cut made lethal by methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, that is a thing, y'all, then this might become an important poem. Important enough for past pets to resurrect. The cat would yodel my praises, the hermit crab would extrovert, the dog meow. For isn't it our nature to overinflate? We who have built nothing, why aren't we something grand, like rain or grass? Why so sand? Beaches have their whiskey shakes and water its virgin whore thing, everyone disrupting our attempts with theirs. And in the meantime, Ozzy remains like the rest of us, just another poet who couldn't write a love poem. And one last poem here. This is going back to that artist colony where I stayed. There was a colony dog where whoever gave a lot of attention because, you know, you were left to your own devices, so you played with ants and you played with dogs and you made little pathways of torn leaves. That's what you do. And this one's called Talia Chasing Grapefruit. The grapefruit rolls downhill, that motion June morning, fruit heavy with 7 days of rain, climbing ants, plump white-veined seeds. The wide paws of the golden spaniel flail after the grapefruit, similar to a conductor crisscrossing his arms in that final dare of energy. Evolution, somewhere then and now, went a little manic and did a step ball change tap movement, and then the fish walked, and the seed split, wet and craving something more. But wait, we should take away agency. The seed sprouted, the sprout seeded. There are limits to knowledge, limits to describing the comedic effect of this dog Talia finally squashing her teeth into the fruit, flipping her head high and prancing by, drooling juice. Sometimes it's best when a poem fails, reminds us of what we can't obtain, of simplicity, like dog, sunlight, rolling grapefruit. Thank you guys. You've been amazing.
Thank you, Charlotte. Next, we're going to hear from Adam. Adam Prince earned his BA from Vassar College, his MA from the University of Arkansas, and his PhD from the University of Tennessee. His debut short story collection, which I think has one of the best titles ever, The Best Wishes of Ugly Men, was published with Black Lawrence Press in June of 2012. The recipient of the 2012-2013 Tickner Fellowship, he was recently named one of the 20 best new writers by Narrative magazine. Adam.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Thanks for having us. We're so thrilled to be here. I really love Arkansas. I got my MFA, as Sandy said, at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, along with Sandy Longhorn, and we just love it. Now that we're living in Illinois, Sandy, I know you're from the Midwest and you love it, but it's not as good. It's just not. It's just not. I mean, the people are nice. Don't get me wrong. People are very nice, but Arkansas is way better. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to read 2 or 3 real short flash fiction pieces. And warning, just up front, I'm going to tell you if you want to leave now or if you want to leave later, my work is pretty raunchy at points. It just is, okay? So and you know, I don't know, I know, ma'am, you brought a baby. She's probably pretty young, so maybe she won't know what the heck I'm talking about. But if you get nervous, leave, because I don't want to be responsible, okay? I love children. I have a 2-year-old, but I get nervous when people bring them to my readings. So anyway, that said, and it's going to get more, you know, it starts off like kind of make you nervous, but the third one, by the time we get to the third one, you know, you're probably going to be kind of uncomfortable. Just so you know. You know, and with fiction, I don't know if you've covered sort of the unreliable narrator and the fact that characters are not necessarily, you know, some of these people don't act all that great, you know. That doesn't necessarily mean they're meant to be neat. No women tonight. Jim and I buzz along an edge of the Pacific Ocean in a dinghy, trying for the next harbor. Swell high, moon gone. Jim's up at the bow, thick, stubborn, drunk. dangling his feet into the water and yelling how we're men. White men in America, lucky as hell. Years ago, his older brother died in a car crash. Sometimes he uses that as a line with women. Sometimes it even works. Drinking can trigger his seizures, but he doesn't want to stop, and I tell myself that making people do things they don't want to isn't a part of my beliefs anymore. Keep hold of the rope, I say instead, and he asks me who I'd die for. I give it some thought. Tell him, no one. No one? No one? Not your parents? Not your ex-wife? What kind of human being are you? I don't know, I tell him. I'd die for my ex-wife, he said. I'd die for her. There's 10, 15 people I'd die for at least. Maybe even you selfish piece of shit. It doesn't count if you want to die anyway. I think he'll be mad, but he laughs instead. We're men, aren't we? Fucking men. Yeah, I say. Unable to match his enthusiasm. I'm closer to my own divorce than he is to his, and the guilt of my failure pulls hard. A swell hits. Jim wobbles and tilts. He's twitching now and too far to reach. Hold on to the rope. He's not even a good swimmer. We talked it all over before the trip, the way that grown men do. He said that if he had a seizure and fell into the Pacific, then I should go in after him, do my best, and no hard feelings either way. That's that one. There's sort of a trajectory, I think, in this book with the flash fiction pieces. So you might kind of get some sort of an arc as this sort of this. I think of this as the same first-person character. This one's called 6 Months in Another Kind of Undressing. She wants to have sex, but it's only a one-bedroom apartment, and her toddler's asleep in the dirty white chair next to the bed. What if he wakes up, I ask. He's not going to wake up. Yeah, but what if he does? He won't. Fuck, what if he does? He's seen worse. It's not, I think this is an issue of cultural differences, I tell her. We compromise on sex in the kitchen. So added to all the other things I'm already trying to ignore is the smell of milk and beer gone bad, and the line of ants traversing the brown grime that coats the linoleum floor. Still, she herself is an easy distraction, a slender, 21-year-old Latin Snow White who flutters her eyes innocently even as her body does otherwise. Up until now, she would appear at my apartment a few nights a week in tiny shorts and high heels. Throw down a couple beers before we got to it. Dirty stuff and loud. Epiphanies of deviance and skin. This is the first time she's invited me to her place, invited me to meet her toddler, and only briefly have I allowed myself to wonder why. He and I played a while before he fell asleep. House. We played house. Not so long ago, when she herself was a toddler, she would listen to baseball on the radio with her grandpa, even though she'd never seen a game and didn't understand what runs, what steals, what home even meant. Once, her grandpa had let her crayon his white hair rainbow just because she wanted to. Later, he couldn't wash the waxy rainbow out, had to shave his head. When she was 12, he died, the first of many men to let her down. I'm going to leave this country soon. In her building's rotting stairwell, as I say the small goodbye that only hints at the bigger one, she sobs and grabs and pleads love, though all she's pleaded up until now is fucking. And I, 32, polite behind my glasses, convince both her and myself that I'm surprised. The building is dim, the ceiling low. The neighbor with the mustache and gym shorts watches from his doorway as if we're something on Telemundo. Our noise wakes up her son. He runs out into the hallway, chuckles, squeals, makes a jumping lap around us, trying his little boy best to make Mom happy again. He does her favorite game, the one she's always trying to get him to do in front of her friends, his Elmo dance for her. Let's see if I have time to read. Oh, I've got time to read the really offensive one, all right. Offensive, I don't know, but you know. This one's called Kink. And it's a touch longer than the others, but not too long. Kink. This hideous man at the sex shop, this muppet made of meat, leads me through the stages of a woman's life by way of vibrators. These are popular with the sorority girls, he says, of the small pastel lipstick tubes. Those are good for women about to get married, of the primary colored American missiles, straightforward, optimistic. When the women get older, they tend to branch off. Bad marriage, divorce. She usually turned to the realistic stuff. Realistic, but bigger, understand. The man she thought she was getting. What do you want this for, anyway? What's the purpose of the tool? Christmas, I tell them, a Christmas gift. Yeah, but what's it for? Couples play, just for her? And what do I say? Do I tell them that back when she was stuck in a safe, unsatisfying marriage, Kate had short-circuited her last vibrator by wiring it to a car battery in hopes it might deliver more? That this new vibrator will be some kind of a reference to that story? That I'll be gone a few weeks visiting my parents, and I simultaneously want and do not want to invite her? What I finally say is both. And he seems to accept the answer. Walks me over to a glass case, or else, he says, they get into kink. Anal beads, remote control. This one here attaches to your iPod, adjusts along with the rhythm of the music. Or here, he says, picking up a thick, fingerless hand, translucent with ball bearings inside. This. Now this is for a woman who knows what she wants. He turns on the motor, invites me to grip the thing, feel the power of its vibration rotation deluxe. Then the presentation is over and it's time for me to decide. What are you feeling, he asks. What do you want? His Muppet eyes are the drooping, oval kind, the kind that evoke pity, mine for him, his for me. He waits. He's patient, a sage and Freudian both, knowing the weight of my decision, a question of character and maybe even of fate, because we are our genitals. When the sex shop man and I were first easing into this conversation, this inquiry into the right vibrator for Kate, he told me a story. A certain woman came into the shop looking for a harness, and then she invited him over to her apartment, where she tied him down and shot 1,000 volts into him with a defibrillator. I think there's a moral there, but I'm not sure what. Something about how all men deserve punishment just for being what we are. Something about the close relationship between lust and danger, or the wonders of being tied down. And maybe, if I could answer that question, then I could answer this one too. What is the right vibrator for Kate? A 35-year-old woman who skips a lap around the table when she likes my carrot soup? A silly, serious woman who giggles in her sleep, sneers before orgasm, puzzles out blank verse and contracts for home loans, both? A woman I can't seem to run away from, despite all my practice and talent for it. Or to sneak up on this question from its opposite side, which of these vibrators do I most resemble? What corners of pleasure do I nudge in her, and how long can I manage to keep doing it? This whole thing is starting to seem like a bad idea. Maybe buying a woman a vibrator is just an admission of my inadequacy, or my desire to be replaced, or both. What if it's both, a second because of the first? The ugly man in the sex shop sage, he's still looking at me, blinking at me, like he knows what I'm about, even if I don't know myself. But I go ahead. Get her some approximation of what I figure she'd want. A purple, forked, modern art thing that doesn't look too much like a cock, and so doesn't, I hope, suggest replacement, but addition. It's an addition. Later, I gift wrap the vibrator while thinking about all the things wrong with me. Flighty, cerebral, oversexed. On the card, I write my most sincere attempt at confession. Dear Kate, I'm not the man you think you're getting. Yes, you are, she says when she reads it. Yes, you are. Thanks.
We have some time for a question and answer, if anybody has a question. And Adam and Charlotte are both well-skilled in the classroom, so y'all can...
Who else? Yes.
Is that what we are?
I don't know.
Yeah, you are.
Yes.
How long does it usually take to write a poem?
That's a,
Can you repeat the question?
yeah, how long does it usually take to write a poem? That's a great question. You know, it really depends on the poem. You're right. I mean, the book, The Branch is the Axe That's Missing, it's a 20-page poem. I consider that one long poem. And then that one took me 2.5 years. Right, yeah, because once I started getting into it, I realized that I was wanting to also talk about evolution, and I needed to do some research, and it was just it was just a really complicated poem. So that one took me a very long time. Usually, though, a poem I will go through minimum about 25 drafts, just to give you a sense. And I have like 3 readers who always read my work first, and then I'll throw it out to some unlucky person as well, just a random person. But it takes me a while. It takes me a while. So the Ozymandias and Ye, that's, I said, a new poem. That first began in December, and I'm still working on it, to give you a sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, in the back.
I wonder if each of you guys could talk about a couple of writers that has so influenced your own writing that you feel like you're a student of their work.
Yeah, so he was asking about writers who have influenced us. Adam, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, sure. I'm this Bobby Ambassador. I'm so thrilled you're here.
Hi.
Yeah,
Hi, Bobby.
old friend of mine, also from University of Arkansas, who I haven't seen in a long time. You know, when I always think with this, my 2 big influences are James Salter and Charles Dickens, and they're both very, very different writers. Probably most of you haven't read James Salter, but he's a very quiet, very subtle writer. He writes a lot about sex and lust and all that stuff, but his stuff is very, very quiet. It's very, very subtle, and I think it's just beautiful. And the other writers, I love Dickens, because Dickens is, I think he's widely misunderstood by students and maybe even by professors, but he's such an entertainer, right? His job is always to entertain. He was like the sitcom of the day, you know. So when I write, I try to really balance these 2 things out, right? I want to create something that you can reread, something that you'll read a second or third time, hopefully, and enjoy it, but something that will also really entertain you as you go, right? So that, you know, there's some great quote I read about Dickens is that he plays to the back of the room, right? And so somehow one of my big goals as a writer is to try to sort of do something that does both of those.
What does that mean, playing in the back of the room?
You know, the big gesture to the guy sitting in the back.
I always lie on this question. I make up different writers just depending on my day, because I don't know, I love different writers for different things at different moments of what I do. You know, who I was reading when I first started writing, and I felt horribly guilty for writing in the beginning, because most of my family had to work so hard. It just, I did it, yeah, I first made myself write 8 hours a day, and I don't know if you've ever tried to do that, but you don't have much to say on hour 4, and then you're like still sitting there like, I gotta do this. And I had this really annoying roommate who kept asking if I was working on my diary the whole time. But at that moment, the writer that really did it for me was James Wright. I don't know if many of you are familiar with him. And it isn't because I really liked his stuff, it was because I didn't like his stuff. And I had this professor who kept pushing him on me. He's very quiet, very subtle, and image-driven. And at this point, yeah, I was just starting to write. I was really I was just always telling the point. I was kind of writing in this sense of like, what's the takeaway? Here it is. Which, yeah, I didn't realize that poetry often doesn't operate like that. And so I had this professor, he just kept asking me, have you read this poem by him? Have you read this poem by him? And this poem? And I remember I went to the grocery store because I was trying to finish this assignment for this poetry professor, reading James Wright, and I was just getting mad. I was standing there, I am trying to decide between the cheap lettuce or the organic lettuce, and that whole debate, well, maybe this time pesticides are okay for me. And then this professor comes up and he says, what about page 77? Did you look at page 77? I'm like, oh my God. But so then I went home, and then I finally understood his poems. I just hadn't understood them. I had to read them like 100 times. And it's now when I read them, it's all so clear, but sometimes it just happens. Like somewhere that just didn't work for you suddenly does. So I would say James Wright, and then the other one, Anne Carson, is my current love, just because when I get one of her books, I usually don't even know what it is. One of her recent books was like this big, and you pull it out, it's one long accordion page, and it's supposed like a scrapbook about her brother's death. I like being confused. Yeah.
I have a question for the both of you. What and when did you first publish?
What and when did we first publish? Well, literary journals, like schools' literary journals, but my very first poem publication, I was 21 at University of Tennessee, and my poem was accepted by Christian Science Monitor. Well, yeah, which is pretty good for a first poem. I don't know if you know. I mean, yeah. And they gave me $20 for this. And I remember thinking, ooh, that is a bottle of white Zinfandel and an Indian lunch buffet. I can do this. Yeah, so that was my first. It was about a lizard. Yeah, it was about a lizard.
Your mom's got that poem in the bathroom.
It's in my mom's bathroom. My mom takes my stuff and she puts it by the toilet. And I know for her that means she's proud of me, but for me it's kind of an insult, but we just worked around it.
That was a pretty good poem. I read that every time I go into your mom's bathroom. I think, oh, that's a really good poem. Mine was about, I think it was about two or 3 years, a real long MFA at Arkansas. It was a four-year MFA, and I think it was about second or third year. It took me quite kind of a while, it was in this free publication in New York called Literal Latte, which is such a stupid name.
No, that's good.
I mean, it's a decent magazine, but that's such a dumb name. But it was this story that I was very, very proud of about a college professor who gets the stigmata, or thinks he gets the stigmata and is lying about it. But it took a while, and there was a point where in the MFA, when we first got there, I think everyone was very anxious to publish. We got to publish, and I felt like I had to step back from it and just work on the writing for a while, So I didn't pursue that as much right away. I felt like I needed to kind of get some craft things sorted out first.
Thank you.
How does the digital world made writing different for you all? I mean, rather than having something actually physically published?
That's a good question. How is the digital world made publishing or writing different?
Well, the writing, really.
Made the writing different.
I mean, as far as having an outlet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you'll have a very different answer than I will on this, just because the two genres. Poetry lends itself so well to the digital formatting, right? It fits nicely on the screen. We like shorter content when we go online. At the same time, for me, I have to think about audience a little bit more. I don't think about that so much when I'm writing the poem, but when I am deciding where to send it, there are just some things I don't want online, because you do have more readership online. And so if it's too hurtful to somebody, I'll put it in a really good magazine that no one reads. But I will move toward like print magazines, so if anyone would recognize themselves, it wouldn't be out there so public.
Yeah, I like that comment that Charlotte said, really good magazine that no one reads. That's what, this question is really complicated, but the one facet of it that I thought I would talk about is that there's this weird conundrum when you write something, especially with fiction. I mean, it takes me a long time to finish a single short story just because of the length comparatively to poetry. And so it's very important where I publish that, right? And there are magazines that have that are very well established and that will look good on my resume, but that don't necessarily have much of a readership, printed stuff, Whereas I can publish something at a place online that doesn't have the reputation, but 10 times the amount of people will read it. So it's kind of a strange conundrum, and it's made publishing easier, but it somehow means a little less.
Since everyone can do
Yeah, since it's so easy to do, there's so many places online. I could write something and spend probably 2 days doing it, and then get it published. But it wouldn't be any good, and it wouldn't mean very much. So it's hard to know how to slow down. You know what I mean? And hard to. But I don't know, it's a real mixed bag and very complicated.